Welcome. I'm Marguerite Gong Hancock, Vice President of Innovation and Lead for Programming here at CHM. We're thrilled you're participating and hope that today's program on integrity will help you learn a new insight or see a new perspective. These virtual programs are made possible through the generosity of our members and donors. Now more than ever, we need you to help support the museum as a vital cultural institution as we deliver on our mission to decode technology for everyone to shape a better future. Please visit our website today to join and give. And now for today's program, our first virtual workshop this year. Be sure to add your questions and complete a survey afterwards to let us know your thoughts. Ethics and values such as integrity are at the core of shaping a better future. And as we've seen from a stream of events and news headlines, most tech companies think they have integrity. Yet, week after week, we see organizations or leaders come under fire for failing to live up to their values. They're exposed by data, skewered by the press, boycotted by customers, dropped by investors, or protested by their own employees. Many people are calling for an ethical revolution across the technology sector. Expectations for companies are changing from do no evil to do good. This sounds good, but it's proven hard to implement. How do companies and their leaders actually put into practice ethics and integrity at the center of their culture? Besides Me Too, what are some ethical blind spots that organizations should be paying attention to? In a digital and a global age with shifting cultural norms, how can organizations reinforce common standards of integrity while at the same time respecting each employee's rights to their personal opinions and preferences? Today's workshop will be led by Rob Chesnut, author of Intentional Integrity. A graduate of Harvard Law School and the University of Virginia, he joined eBay in 1999 as its third lawyer and founded its trust and safety team. In 2016, he joined Airbnb, where he was general counsel and chief ethics officer and now senior advisor. Respected among many Silicon Valley technology leaders, Rob was described by LinkedIn founder and Greylock venture capitalist Reid Hoffman as an insider who's combined doing good with doing business well in two iconic Silicon Valley companies, someone who can offer smart, practical advice. As is our tradition here at CHM, I'll introduce Rob with 5 numbers. $12, the amount he made per night as his first job as a dishwasher. 14 years worked as an attorney in the US Justice Department. 170, his employee number at eBay. 7 million, the number of items listed every day on eBay when he started the trust and safety department. 6, the number of C's that are the principles of Airbnb's integrity program. Today's workshop will be divided into 3 parts. First, Rob will share some of his key ideas around intentional integrity. Then the two of us will have a fireside chat with opportunities for audience involvement, followed by time for questions from each of you in the audience. Rob, we're excited to have you here on the CHM virtual stage. Take it away.
Marguerite, thank you. Thank you for that warm introduction. It's wonderful to be here. Let's start things off right away. I love to get a sense of the group whenever I do one of these talks. So let's start with a poll. I'd love to get the answer to this question, if everybody can participate. Pretty simple. Do you have integrity? Yes or no? And while you are pondering that question, I want to tell you a story about someone who lived about 2,400 years ago in ancient Greece. His name was Diogenes, and Diogenes was a bit of a character. Diogenes was known for giving up all of his worldly possessions. He lived in a tub, and one of the unusual things that Diogenes did was, Diogenes was known for going to the market in broad daylight with a lantern. And Diogenes would walk around the market with a lantern, and he would come right up to people and put the lantern right up in their face. And he would look at them in the eye. And when people ask, what are you doing? Diogenes would respond, I'm looking for a person of character. I'm looking for a person of integrity. Now, Diogenes had a nickname. It was Diogenes the Cynic. And as you might imagine from someone who had given up all their worldly possessions and had a nickname like that, Diogenes professed to have no luck at all in his search through the marketplace. He complained that he was surrounded by rascals and scoundrels. And, looking in today's world, we saw the headlines that Marguerite threw up and on the screen earlier. And we could spend the entire day looking at headlines about bad behavior by celebrities, by executives, bad behavior by companies. The last several years have been filled with them. And I think, Diogenes would, I think, certainly feel right at home in this world where it seems as though integrity is lacking. But let's take a look and see how this group does. What would Diogenes think of this group? Margarita, we got the answers? I think Diogenes would be pretty happy about this group. Looks like it is overwhelmingly a group of integrity, 93% with integrity. We've got a couple of folks who don't feel that their level of integrity is up to the right standards. But looking at these numbers, I'm not surprised in that wherever I go, whenever I talk to people, everyone feels that they've got integrity. Yet the odd thing is when we ask people, who do you trust or what do you trust? Trust numbers are at an all-time low. People don't trust government. Trust in the media is way down. Trust in corporations is down. We live in a world that is lacking in trust, yet we all individually feel that we have integrity, which seems to be kind of an unusual situation, right? What is going on? Is our world today somehow less virtuous than it was 20 years ago? I think the answer is no. I think that in reality, what's going on is that the world is changing and we are more than ever connected. We are connected not just by the internet and by travel, we're connected even with things like climate change and the pandemic. Increasingly, things that each of us as individuals do seems greatly connected to what is going on around us. We are not running in our own lanes anymore. As we collide with each other, increasingly trust and integrity becomes more important. Integrity, they said, used to be doing the right thing even when no one is watching. Today, it seems like everyone's always watching. The old story about George Washington cutting down the cherry tree, and when confronted, he said, I cannot tell a lie, it was me. It feels like in today's world, George Washington would have been outed on YouTube and decried for deforestation before he could even make it back to the shed to hang up the axe. There were 3 news stations when I was growing up. Today, each of us is our own news station. We can post, we can blog, we carry around our own camera crew in the palm of our hand in the form of our cell phone. And we can immediately reach a global audience with what we see and what we do. Things move at lightning speed. And as a result, it seems that everything we do, everything we write, everything we say is immediately exposed to a broader world. And the consequences can be tremendous and devastating. Look at Susan Fowler, for example. Her one blog post at Uber completely changed the dynamic of that company and caused their founder to be blown out of the company. And there are numerous examples of this. What we've seen is that integrity, as we get closer and closer, integrity matters more than ever. It's at the foundation of human relationships. And that is increasingly putting pressure on companies to act with integrity. As is, I think, the lack of trust in government. Look, I think a lot of us are increasingly concerned that government isn't solving some of the world's biggest problems. And increasingly, we are all turning to companies to solve those big problems. We need companies to step up. So the issue, I think, then for companies is the standards are changing. More is expected of leaders. And by the way, this pressure is coming from a lot of different places. A lot of it comes from employees themselves. Employees want more than a paycheck today. They want to feel as though when they go to work every day, they're actually doing something positive for the world. And if they feel as though a company where they work doesn't have values that are up to their standards, they're talking to each other on Blind and on Slack. They're blogging about it. They're tweeting about it. They're even organizing walkouts. And it's not just employees, it's consumers. Consumers are now looking very closely at the companies they do business with. If I wanted to learn about a company I was doing business with, I might have to go into Encyclopedia Britannica back in my parents' bedroom. That might have 10-year-old information. Today, that information is available at everyone's fingertips instantly, and consumers are acting on it. We are in an age of conscious consumerism, and consumers are taking their money and they are moving it based upon what they perceive to be the values of the company or where they would spend the money. So this presents, of course, a very challenging situation for leaders, particularly since government will jump right in. If they see employees and consumers pushing, then government will push on these companies as well. Complicating things, I think, for leaders is the fact that the very purpose, the fundamental underpinnings of what a company should be are changing. When I first got involved in the business world, what a company should do was governed by one fundamental principle. And that was a principle that was developed by Milton Friedman and an academic by the name of Michael Jensen. And that was called the shareholder value theory of running a company. Now, under this theory, companies were charged with really one task, and that is increase shareholder value, which means drive up that stock price, focus on the money. And as long as you were doing that, then your actions were justified. I think what's happened just in the last few years, as we are now running in these lanes that are closer and closer together, and as the lantern of public opinion is shining more brightly on these actions, I think we see that old way of thinking is actually not very good for the world. So if you're running a company, for example, and all you're worried about is driving up a quarterly stock price, maybe you're not thinking about the consequences of your company's actions in a broader world. You're not thinking about the carbon that's being emitted up into the sky as a result of what your company does. You're not thinking about the suppliers on the other side of the world and the working conditions for workers there. Maybe you're not thinking about racial justice or diversity. Instead, you're thinking about, well, it's justified. I don't even have to worry about the ethics of a situation, or I can cut corners because I'm doing what I'm told to do, get up that stock price. That philosophy is now increasingly being discredited and replaced with a new world. And that new world is called the Stakeholder Principles. That is, companies need to recognize that they have multiple stakeholders. Of course, they owe something to investors. And a company needs to make money if it's going to survive and do good. But I think more importantly, what the world wants is the world wants companies that have a North Star, that have a purpose. And profit is not purpose. So a company needs to have a North Star, why what it's doing is good for the world, and it needs to define who its stakeholders are. At Airbnb, for example, the company has 5 stakeholders. Investors obviously are very important, but so are their employees, so are their host and their guest. And Airbnb recognizes the world at large, the communities where it does business as stakeholders. So that makes it more complicated for leaders because now they've got to balance different interests of the different stakeholders. They've got to be responsible to different stakeholders. And I think one challenge is, how do you measure all this? I think we all know that in business, you tend to do what you measure. And companies are really good at measuring the financials. They've been doing that now, for decades. But what they have to learn to do is measure the impact of their business on other stakeholders and the broader community, and come up with standards for recognizing their obligation to report on these and act on these. But I think what's really powerful out of all this is that companies that understand this integrity revolution, companies that understand how the world is changing and how the expectations have risen for leaders, companies that get it will actually be able to benefit. Integrity is a powerful double-edged sword. If you don't get it, you run the risk of being skewered in the court of public opinion, chased after by government, and actually gone after and ridiculed by your own employees with damage to the brand. If, on the other hand, you understand this and understand how the world is changing, you see that integrity can be wind at your back. It can actually develop an employee base that is more loyal, customers that are passionate advocates, reduced audit cost and government regulatory cost. And it's interesting, the data shows that companies that get it right, that operate with a purpose and with integrity, the data shows that they actually outperform the market and they outperform their competitors. So the irony is there's value in values. If you don't run after the immediate short-term money, but actually have a longer-term purpose and a plan, that may actually and will, over the long run, if you do it properly, increase your value as a company. So you don't have to choose between doing good and doing well. There's actually quite a bit of congruence between the two. And not just with a purpose in the outer world, because look, a company can't have a wonderful purpose to do good in the world and yet treat its own people poorly. Part of acting with integrity is recognizing the obligation of leaders to operate a company and a culture internally that treats employees well, respects them. And I think part of operating this way is what is now expected and what employees demand. It also, I think, will require leaders to do something they haven't been comfortable with, and that is actually talk about integrity and recognize that it's a critical element of every leader's description. Integrity is it is a lot like a garden. If you ignore it, if you don't tend to it, on its own, I think integrity tends to deteriorate. If you pay attention to it, if you invest in it, if you talk about it and you reward it, make it something that you are intentional about. Integrity is actually contagious. It's something that resonates with people, and where people feel they are in an environment of integrity, they actually respond to it with integrity. There's an old story about a father and son, and the father said to the son, son, there are two wolves fighting inside of me. In fact, there are two wolves fighting inside of all of us. There's a good wolf and a bad wolf. The good wolf is one who operates with integrity, with empathy, thinking about others, and taking into account a large number of other people's interests and when they operate with the world. Where the bad wolf is a wolf that is very selfish, greedy, viewing the world as a zero-sum game and trying to take as much as they can. And even if they have to lie and cheat in order to operate, that's what they do. But now the son looked at the father and said, Father, who will win the fight inside of me between the good wolf and the bad wolf? And the father responded, the wolf that you feed. The wolf that you feed. You see, by paying attention to integrity, paying attention to and focusing on these things, rewarding it, you actually create an environment that feeds it, makes it stronger and healthier, and ultimately, I think, improves the entire environment that you're operating in. So, maybe one of the things that we can talk about next, I know Marguerite is waiting. Maybe we can have her come back and join me and talk a little bit about how to feed the good wolf in your personal life and in the company where you operate. Marguerite?
Great. Well, thanks so much, Rob, for laying out your call to action, really, this impassioned call for intentional integrity. Before we jump into talking about how to feed that good wolf and grow our garden of integrity, I'd love to just pull back the curtain a little bit to get for our viewers to know more about you. In your book, Intentional Integrity, you call it a memoir of a life's journey. And so I'd like to just start by asking, why you chose to write this book and how is it specifically tied to your own life story?
I'd never thought specifically about integrity until about 4 or 5 years ago, at least in the workplace. I think integrity in many places, it's unspoken. It's the pretty poster on the wall with the lake and the trees. There's a code of ethics, but it's kind of buried in the corporate intranet. But when I sort of noticed the world changing about 4 years ago, Marguerite, with with Me Too problems at a lot of companies and leaders, and it got me thinking about, wow, the world seems to be changing here. What are we doing at Airbnb to make sure that we don't end up with these sorts of problems? Somebody ought to do something about it. And then I kind of looked around and said, well, I wonder who that somebody would be. Whose job is it? And I talked to Brian Chesky, the founder, and that first day we didn't have any answers, but in typical Brian fashion, he looked at me and said, go big. And the programs we developed there were resonated with people in ways I didn't really anticipate. And it got me thinking about integrity a lot more. And that's when I was talking to my wife, who used to be in the publishing industry, and she talked me into doing the book because she said, this is the sort of stuff that companies aren't doing and need to do. And I think I started out thinking that I had all of this great information, but I think, writing a book is itself a learning journey. I learned as much about integrity during the writing process because I went out and talked to people who had thought about it, quite a bit. People like Carlos Santana, Commissioner Adam Silver of the NBA, Reid Hoffman, people like former Attorney General Eric Holder, and getting a lot of different perspectives on it, I think really informed my perspective. And actually then got me reflecting on how throughout my life, I had always done things that were around rules. As a federal prosecutor, I was about enforcing rules. At eBay, I was charged with creating the rules that would govern what you could buy and sell online. And I sort of reflected that it was a theme that had tied my life together in a lot of ways. So that made it a personal effort as well as a professional effort.
You mentioned that you were 14 years, right, as a federal prosecutor, and you had the distinction of trying CIA spies like Aldrich Ames. Was that influential around your passion and philosophy about integrity? People who were literally rule breakers? And
yeah, I think it was in a way. I mean, I think, look, the ultimate misconduct in the workplace is betraying your country and selling its secrets to a foreign power. So there's no doubt that I think I prosecuted about a half dozen espionage cases as a prosecutor, and that certainly influenced me. But I think, what also influenced me were the cases that weren't as sexy, but just as impactful. And that is, I prosecuted a lot of young people. I prosecuted a lot of drug cases, bank robberies, which are really very sad stories of people who feel like they have no hope or no other way. Maybe they lived in environments where integrity wasn't talked about or wasn't important. And I ended up putting a lot of young people away in jail for long periods of time. And, what it did, I think, was it was a powerful influence on me, and that I didn't want to put people in jail anymore. To be honest with you, it was very sad. And what I wanted to do was I wanted to get involved with a business, with companies, because I think companies have the power to do such good in the world. And I love the idea of being preventative. I love the idea of creating environments and intentionally where people can thrive and be successful and can avoid the sort of mistakes that younger people were making when I was a prosecutor. So I think very much, my experience as a prosecutor was a powerful motivator for me to be involved and try to prevent problems.
So you then went to eBay, and you said you like to rules, but this was sort of the Wild West. It was such a nascent industry in e-commerce, and it was uncharted territory about how to make these things work. So your role, I was curious about what was it like to be running trust and safety there at eBay, and what kinds of challenges did you have where you needed to invent rules? And then how did you solve that?
Yeah, I remember Meg Whitman coming to me in my first couple of weeks and said, she told me, "You're in charge of figuring out what we can buy and sell." And I remember she said, "I want you to figure out where the line is and then keep us well on the good side of it. We have a very good business, and we don't want to be cutting things close to the line. We want to be a well-lit, respected marketplace." So, that when it comes to tone from the top, which I talk about in the book quite a bit, I had that kind of positive leadership example right from the beginning, because it was a daunting challenge. Can you sell guns on eBay? Can you sell wine? Can you scalp tickets? How do you deal with conflicting laws? I mean, just within the United States, how would you deal with ticket scalping? I remember I got a call from the Florida Attorney General's office one day, and they were very upset because we had tickets on eBay for a Florida football game. And the attorney from the Attorney General's office was admonishing me about the Florida law, which didn't allow the resale of tickets above the ticket price. And I remember I looked at the listing, and my response was, "Can you tell me what law applies? If the seller of the tickets is in Georgia, the buyer of the tickets is in Alabama, the platform that's selling the tickets is in California, and the game is in Florida." And there was a moment of silence, and then we both laughed because neither one of us knew. But it was an interesting journey, kind of walking through what laws applied, and when there wasn't a clear law, what was the right thing to do? Because if you could figure out the right thing, you would actually stave off a regulation that might actually be unnecessarily burdensome on the business. So, another example I talk about in the book, my first month at the company, I got an email from someone who said, "You all are all going to jail because you're selling jarts." Now, when somebody sends me a note saying you're going to go to jail, that gets my attention because I didn't want to go to jail. But I didn't know what a jart was. So I quickly went over to my computer and I typed in jart. I learned that jarts were also known as lawn darts. They were these metal darts with these big plastic fins. And it was some toy manufacturer had the great idea that they would create this game where you would take these darts and you would throw them on the grass into a circle on the grass. And that would be a wonderful game. What they hadn't anticipated, of course, was that kids would throw them not just into circles on the lawn, but they'd start throwing them at each other. And kids were showing up in emergency rooms with darts coming out of different parts of their body. So the government banned them, right? So I'm thinking, oh, wow. The government's banned these as unsafe. It looks like somebody's trying to sell a set of jarts. I better get it taken down. I go online. We didn't have one set of jarts. We had about 20. And that's when it hit me. Wow, I don't have a jarts problem. I've got a problem of every item the Consumer Product Safety Commission has ever banned. Baby toys, power tools. And how in the world were we going to deal with something like this? And I think, because, we had the message from the top to do the right thing. My primary motivation was the safety of our user base. So I got on an airplane and I flew to Washington, D.C. Now, not a lot of lawyers, I think, would have done this, but I came from the government and I trusted the government. So I went into the Consumer Product Safety Commission and I put down a copy of a jarts listing on the table in front of their general counsel. And I said, "This is why I'm here. And I don't want our users hurt. And I'd like to work with you and partner with you to protect consumers." I said, because this isn't an eBay problem. This is an internet-wide problem. And they took me up on my offer. We partnered. I gave them free space on eBay. We started doing searches together for banned items. We started educating our users. And I think instead of a major liability issue where there could have been class action lawsuits with people injured, and government regulation, the government never felt the need to actually regulate because we stepped up and owned it and did the right thing, I think, for a critical stakeholder, which was buyers on our site. And I think that's the way that we tried to approach things. And I think it worked very well for the company in the early days.
It's a great example. I'd like to turn now to your experience at Airbnb, where you not only were making decisions for the company, but really creating a whole culture through employee training. If I were a new employee at Airbnb, what would I experience? What did you do to help create the culture that went throughout the organization, not just at the top?
I mean, one thing we did at Airbnb that most companies don't do is we had integrity training your first week as part of orientation. You know, when we have a pretty involved orientation at Airbnb, it's a week of classes. There are about 20 to 25 of these. And when I went to the team and said I wanted to do integrity training, they looked at me and said, "Oh, a lawyer is going to be teaching new people about integrity. We don't want to drive people away the first week, Rob." But I made a deal with them. I said, "Look, you know, you all do blind surveys at the end of the week." I said, "Let's see how it goes. I've got an idea. But if it doesn't resonate with people, then we won't torture them with this stuff." And what we decided was that, first of all, orientation is the best time to talk with people about integrity. It's the time to set expectations and to talk with people about, this is the kind of company we want to be. And what better time to get to them and have that conversation than right at the beginning. I also learned that people love to learn through stories. So what we did, you know, I put aside my lawyer hat. I committed that I wouldn't talk about the law. You know, there was no discussion about what an uncomfortable work environment would be in the area of sexual harassment, for example. Instead, we told stories. We took examples of actual ethical dilemmas that Airbnb employees were in and the decisions that they made. And then we asked people, names are removed, so there were no guilty parties in this, but we asked people in the group, what do you think? What was the right choice from an integrity perspective? And we would walk through the scenarios, and at the end of the hour, people understood our code of ethics and what we meant by integrity through those stories. And the gratifying thing was, by the third week, it was the #1 ranked class at orientation out of 25 classes. And it told me that this stuff really resonates with people. People were coming up to me. I had a woman literally come up to me in tears after one of the sessions. And I'm thinking, oh no, what did I say? And she said, "You didn't say anything wrong at all, Rob." She said, "Quite the opposite." She said, "I was working at another tech company until this week. And my boss at my old company kept propositioning me and wouldn't leave me alone." And she said, "I didn't trust the company I was working at to do anything about it." She said, "I had to leave my job." And she said, "This is my first week at my new job." She said, "You have no idea what it means to have a leader stand up in front of the room and talk about these sorts of issues directly." She said, "I've never heard it done anywhere else, but it means the world to me. Thank you." And this stuff resonates with employees because they want to be proud of the place that they work. You just have to, as a leader, get over the discomfort about talking about this stuff.
Could we together right now experience one of these scenarios? In your book, you have things that you call code moments. There are tens of them. And I wonder if we could if you could lay out a scenario and we could learn together what the ethical dilemma is and see how we might think about it. Let's start with Regina and the telltale text.
Let's do it. All right. So this comes right from the book, and it's a story of an executive assistant who had been an executive assistant to an executive for a number of years. But one day, the assistant gets a text from the wife of the executive, very upset because the wife has apparently found a series of text messages on the executive's iPhone that suggest he was having an affair. And the wife asked the executive assistant, "Is Mike having an affair? What's going on?" And the assistant said, I don't know anything about it. Might be a wrong number, and then hangs up. Well, a few minutes later, the executive calls the assistant, very angry. What is wrong with you? Why didn't you cover for me? It might be a wrong number. Why didn't you tell her you were sure it was a mistake? You're supposed to have my back. I want an assistant I can trust, and then hang up. Ball's in the executive assistant's court. What should the assistant do? For me, that is a horrible position to put someone in, right? There's often this idea of that loyalty in the workplace is a virtue. However, I don't think you should ever be in a position where you are expected to lie for another employee under this guise of loyalty. Obviously, what the executive did here was terribly wrong. Should never have put their executive assistant in that sort of a situation. Never expect them to certainly lie. And then making a phone call like that, now has the assistant worried, are they going to be retaliated against for not lying? So on the one hand, they could report it to HR, right? And I think that would be the standard answer, and might be the right course. Certainly, this would then lead to some sort of an investigation. The executive would be questioned about their behavior. And the downside of this, of course, is you have, in this particular case, a 10-year relationship that's ruined, right? Because now you've just reported your boss to HR. Your boss is going to be angry with you. You know, by law, you can't be retaliated against for a report like this. But boy, that is going to be a challenging dynamic in the future. If you say nothing or do nothing, you're in a vulnerable position as well, right? You are now going to be in a position where you didn't do anything wrong. You were put in a horrible position. And now suddenly you could find, what happens if your next work review is negative for the first time in your career? What if the person you're working with no longer treats you the same? One thing I suggested as an option that at least someone in this position might want to consider is having a conversation with the executive, a private one-on-one conversation. Say, look, what you're doing with your personal life, you're going to have to figure that out. But I'm not going to lie for you. And I'm very upset that you even put me in a position to lie. And, you know, hopefully the executive in that situation would immediately recognize the error of their ways and apologize to the assistant and put it behind them. The interesting issue, of course, is now if the executive was having an affair with a vendor from another company, the executive assistant might now be in a difficult position because perhaps the executive is spending money, the company's money, to fly and go visit this vendor. Maybe this executive is now no longer able to effectively manage the vendor because they're engaged in a personal relationship. So I think if that's what's going on, then I would say that the assistant probably has no choice other than to report it, because it would be a violation of the company. It may well be a violation of the company's code for an executive to even have a relationship with a vendor in these circumstances. So I think the point of this one is it's complicated. The executive assistant is in a horrible position, maybe even a no-win position, and it has a number of factors to consider. But what I want everybody to walk away from in that situation is, wow, as a leader, if you are having a relationship with someone at a vendor company, what a tangled web you're weaving. And you should never expect anyone that you work for to lie for you. And by doing that, you may have committed an ethical violation that endangers your own job.
This is important questions, and it seems that organizations can sometimes have ethical blind spots where it's outside the purview of regular rules or even a code of ethics. What are some of the ethical blind spots that you think organizations should be paying attention to?
Well, there are a number of ethical blind spots. I mean, let's take alcohol, for example. So many times, Marguerite, I've seen examples where people at companies go to holiday parties. Now, the good news is a silver lining is that there won't be those sort of holiday parties this year in light of COVID, I'm sure, but this is going to come up over and over again in the future. Companies throw big parties. These parties often have alcohol free flowing until all hours of the day and night. Some people drink too much and end up doing something stupid, and that stupid something ends up ruining their career. This was another one of the things that we would openly talk about as part of integrity training. And what I would do as part of integrity training is talk to people about intentionality. And I would explain to them Rob's rule. And people around the company know Rob's rule, and it's something I called Rob's rule rather humorously, but it became more a popular way of thinking about this, which is great. Rob's rule is I will never have more than 2 drinks in any work setting. And a work setting is any setting where there's anyone at the company, another employee, even if it's a after work thing that we're all privately buying our own drinks. Doesn't have to be a formal work function. If I'm with someone from work, it's a work setting. Now, why 2 drinks? Well, for me, I enjoy having a good glass of wine at a work dinner, or maybe trying a local beer with folks if I'm traveling. And I know myself, I can have 2 drinks and I'm not going to do anything dumb. What about that 3rd drink? Well, if I'm tired, if the drink's strong, if I haven't had enough food, I don't know. And my career's worth more to me than that 3rd drink. And so I've made a firm rule with myself that I'm never going to go there. And what I tell people is, you don't have to adopt Rob's rule. Rob's rule, it's named Rob's rule for a reason. It works for me. I know people that don't drink at all, or that will never drink with anyone from work, or they may have a 1 drink limit. I know one person who has a rule, they only drink with strangers, which has some interesting pros and cons. But what I think is really important is you need a rule. And everybody that's here at this the workshop right now, you need to have a rule, and you should come up with a rule for yourself right now. The worst time to be thinking about how much alcohol to drink at a work event is while you're drinking alcohol at a work event. But too often, that's when people first think about it. So having intentionality, thinking about what are the situations that I'm likely going to encounter in the workplace, and then promising yourself that you're going to deal with it a specific way is going to lead to better outcomes for you.
Thank you. So I'd like to now turn to examples of organizations that have faced a crisis and responded well or not. Let's maybe start with Airbnb, since you've just been the chief ethics officer. COVID brought huge challenges to Airbnb, and the company decided in a very public way how to respond to employees and the different shareholders and stakeholders, as you've mentioned, both the hosts as well as people who have booked. Can you walk us through kind of the thinking behind that, and how would you analyze or evaluate that as an example of one company dealing with a crisis in a way that would have some intentional integrity?
Right. Well, yeah, there's nothing harder for me professionally than letting somebody go. I mean, because we are also, our identity is tied up with our work, particularly at a place like Airbnb, where people there really believe in the mission. And unfortunately, because of COVID, the business went from a level like this to nothing overnight, because travel simply stopped around the world. And I think even though you may need to let people go in your business, there are ways to do it with integrity. And I think it shows everyone, including the people who are left behind, that you are genuine when you say that you care about people and you care about your employees. Now, how can you let someone go with integrity? Well, if you have the resources, providing a generous severance, like Airbnb was, I think, not only generous with its severance, but also paid for a year of health coverage, recognizing that particularly in the middle of a pandemic, that's the worst time to be without health coverage. And it can be little things. Part of it is just communicating. It was an immediate tendency by some leaders when COVID hit for leaders to say, we're all in this together, don't worry. Well, in reality, if you're going to have to let people go, then you're really not all in this together, and it might not be okay. And you lose credibility by saying things like that. One thing I respect about the way that Brian handled things at Airbnb was that he came out and didn't say the cheery things. He gave everybody the facts, talked about what was happening with the business in a company-wide meeting, and told people he really didn't know what was going to happen, but that he was working on it and working with members of the board and the executive team, and working with the understanding, knowing what a trying time this is for everyone. And so that there were no expectations. People knew right from the beginning what the story was, and it didn't feel as though they were ever lied to. I also think, look, the executive team at Airbnb took a large pay cut right up front. As a leader, you can't ask people to make major sacrifices if you aren't willing to make those sacrifices first. That's part of being a leader. So I don't have respect for companies, and there are a number of them out there, where the leaders took no pay cut at all and yet laid off thousands of people. I think that's poor leadership. Another small example, Airbnb, often when you leave a company, what do they ask you for? Well, they ask you for two things. They want your badge and they want your computer. But Airbnb thought, well, why do we need the computer back? Why do we need over 1,000 used computers back? In a pandemic, we're not going to be hiring. So what about the people that we're letting go? They may really need those computers. They may have no computer at home or only one computer, and that one computer may be needed by a child to go to school or by a spouse for working. So we decided to let all of the people that we let go keep their laptops. And just a little consideration like that, I think, can send a powerful message. And I think it was part of why, you never want to be lauded for a well-executed layoff. But I think we laid off people in a way that still sent a message that we cared.
You mentioned the importance of leadership and leadership setting the tone, the direction, and messaging. How does that happen? How can it be authentic and persuasive? If you could give a piece of advice to every CEO about how to bring integrity into their organization, what advice would you give?
Well, you've got to walk the talk, and you've got to also talk about it. I think so many leaders are uncomfortable about integrity. They never speak about it. And if ever asked, they're like, well, they feel uncomfortable because, well, we're here for business. We're really not here to talk about morality or values. I think the truth is values, purpose, and integrity are an integral part of leadership. And part of leadership is having an authentic conversation about it with people at the company. People look to leaders to set the tone. I like to say that a leader is the thermostat for integrity at a company, not the thermometer. So what do I mean by that? Well, the thermometer takes the temperature of a room. A thermostat sets it. A leader, by their words and their actions, sets that thermostat. So I'll give you two examples. There's always a leader, and I'm sure people on the call know of leaders like this, who stomp around and say things like, we've got to hit this number no matter what, right? I don't care how you get it done, just get it done. Well, when you say things like that, you are giving people really almost explicit permission to cut ethical corners, right? Because otherwise, people fear for their jobs. They're told that they've got to get it done no matter what. Take another example. Let's take Ben Horowitz. Ben Horowitz, a well-known leader and venture capitalist in Silicon Valley. He told the story, about how every quarter it came down to going through the numbers, and instead of questioning the CFO about wait a minute, that number needs to be something else, right? Instead, Ben would always look at his CFO in a face-to-face meeting, look him in the eye and say, is there anything in these numbers that makes you uncomfortable? Is there anything in here that's misleading? Is there anything in here that doesn't portray an accurate picture and isn't standard according to what the law is? Because Ben would say, we might miss a number. We might even see our stock price go down, or we could even get fired. but we're not going to jail, right? Now, when you have that kind of an honest, direct, specific conversation about doing the right thing, that sets the thermostat very much on the other side. And it's contagious. It actually will then spread because that's the way the CEO wants to do things. And that is a powerful, impactful thing at a company.
Well, I'm asking for advice. What happens? What advice would you give to a company or an individual when there's been integrity lapse, when something has really gone wrong? And in our era where there is a long digital footprint, it's documented in Yelp or in Twitter or on LinkedIn or on the media. And so the bad decision can live online for a long time. What can people do in that situation?
I think there's a tendency a lot of times to bury it. There's a tendency, it's like, well, we're not going to talk about that anymore. Next question, right? And I think that's the worst thing you can do. I think as a leader, what you need to do is you need to address it head on. You need the self-awareness and the humility to say, you know what, we failed here. We made a mistake. Powerful words that are not uttered enough in the world, I think. But I think an acknowledgement of what was done wrong, where you went wrong, with specificity and with authenticity. Everyone needs to understand that this is not the way you want to operate. And once everyone understands that, then you have to come up with a specific plan to ensure that it isn't repeated. And then commit to getting back on the path. Marguerite, integrity is not about perfection, right? If it required perfection, then no one would have integrity. I think the reality is integrity involves setting that North Star, defining your purpose that is associated with things we all generally think of as good, using your best efforts to always follow that North Star. And when you are short, stepping up and saying you got off track and then recommitting back to that purpose. I think silence on a subject like that is often interpreted as meaning you're not sorry. And that's, I think, a recipe for disaster.
Well, let's bring our viewers into the conversation now. We have a whole string of questions and we'll welcome more. You're talking about a North Star. Do you think there's less of a societal consensus today about what constitutes doing the right thing? And if so, why is there less of a consensus today than there used to be?
Yeah, that's a great question. We live in a very divided world, don't we? And I think part of this is the way that we consume information. When I was growing up, and really I think up until fairly recently, we all consumed news from just a few sources. We had 3 news stations growing up. And I remember Walter Cronkite, right? And Dan Rather. Everyone competed, I think, in the news world to play it, to give you the straight facts, put it right down the line, right? Not a slanted perspective. We now get news in very different ways. And I think a number of stations that are news stations are unapologetically, I think, providing a more partisan view of the facts. And so therefore we are in this world where some people get all of their information from one source that is somewhat partisan and slanted. Another big group of people get their information solely from this slanted perspective. Look, we don't even agree on the facts anymore. In the old days, at least, we all agreed on the facts and then could debate, the rights or wrongs there. We're now in a situation where the facts aren't even agreed upon anymore. And I think that presents a real challenge for a world where we need to start putting aside some of the differences. We need to put aside some of the rhetoric. We need to start finding things that we do agree on because we've got a lot of work to do. And as a world, a lot of big challenges to face. And they're going to be hard challenges if we can't bridge the two worlds. Marguerite, I'll tell you one thing I did is I made it a conscious effort to watch multiple news stations, including, one particular station that I don't agree with a whole lot. But I'll tell you, I've learned a whole lot by consuming that perspective. And I have a better understanding of the country as a result. And I think we need to start bridging. I saw a great news story the other day about two neighbors. And one neighbor had a Trump Pence yard sign, and the other neighbor had a Biden Harris election sign in their yards. But right next to it, there were two other signs in the yards that said, "We love our neighbor," with an arrow to pointed to each other, which was, in this divided partisan world we live in, I think was really beautiful. And I think we need to find ways to still to love each other and recognize that we're all humans on this one earth. We're all citizens of this one country, and start solving some problems together instead of fighting each other.
Here's a question that's a variation on that. Now that we're very much in a global, with people all over the world, and there's different cultural norms in different places. So how can organizations both reinforce what should be common standards of integrity across the organization when it's global, while respecting each employee's right to their own opinions or their preferences?
Yeah, that's hard, isn't it? And look, and it's not just global companies that face this. I think we've all recognized the power of diversity. At Airbnb, we used to say, that what makes you different is what makes you so valuable, right? Each person brings a different perspective to the table. I would hate walking into a meeting where everybody looked like me. That was a problem, because that meant that we were going to be missing a whole lot. So the challenge is, in the old days, you might hear phrases like, well, I don't know if we should hire that person. I don't know if they would fit into the culture, right? I kind of like the idea that somebody might be different and might bring a different perspective to the table. That diversity, I think, helps you make better decisions. On the other hand, it creates a challenge where if we have such different perspectives, we all need to be getting along and working together as well. And I think one thing that unifies people at a company is its purpose. If you might be members of different political parties, you might have different religions, you might have had very different upbringings, but what motivates you to join a company is you believe in what they do. You believe that what they do is good and you want to be a part of it. And that's got to be the unifying theme for everyone. And then you have to try to find ways to work through some of the differences. Now, I'll give you a very simple example. One question that we asked at Airbnb one day was, can you hug anybody at work anymore? Right? Now, this was pre-COVID. Now, obviously, in a COVID world, you can't. But in the post-COVID world, too, in light of everything that's gone on with Me Too and sexual harassment, can you hug anybody anymore? And we thought about that. And it was funny. I asked that question in some parts of the world. And the answer I got was, well, Rob, of course, we hug everybody every day. We give everybody a hug and a kiss on the cheek. That's our custom. I asked that question in another part of the world, and I got a very different look. I got well, of course not. That's not what we do. But the approach we took as a company was touching someone else is an act of consent. You need to respect someone else's body. And if you want to make sure you've got consent, you can look to the other person's body language. If someone comes up and says, "Rob, it's great to see you," then obviously the person's good with a hug. If someone says, "Rob, it's good to see you," and holds out a hand, or today an elbow, then that's fine too. But I think it's about respect for the differences. And I think if you start out with the respect for the difference and the understanding that the differences are what make the company strong, you're in a better place.
Here's a request for another code moment. Could you walk us through another case study? How about one of the ones that caught my eye was about privacy. I think you called it Tory and 10 sheets of paper.
Sure. Well, Tory works in a data analytics department of a company. And they have quite a big mailing list, right? A number of buyers. Now, Tori also has a sister who has a little home business that knits beautiful, bulky sweaters on there. And the sister's struggling to make ends meet. And so after Tori ends up, doing her marketing report, she prints out a copy of the database, of her customer database, and sends it to her sister, saying, "Thought this would be helpful, and you can target these folks with an email to get sweater orders." And when the sister says, "Oh, this is wonderful, thank you so much." "Oh, no problem. I had to do this report anyway. And nobody cares about 10 sheets of paper. I just saw my boss had 10 sheets of paper on the copy machine the other day doing invitations to a meeting. So sending you 10 sheets of paper isn't a problem." So, one issue is, what is 10 sheets of paper? Can you run off something personal on a copy machine anymore? And by the way, you started to think about that for a minute. Can you make personal use of office resources like a copy machine? And there are different ways of looking at it. At Airbnb, though, we actually answered that question because we thought it was important. And our answer was, well, yes, you can use the copy machine for personal use as long as the cost to the company is minimal. So as long as you're only running off, 10, 20 copies of something, the cost to the company is minimal. We want to appreciate the fact that people are busy. And maybe if someone is on a board of a nonprofit and they want to print off an agenda, perfectly fine to do it. So the idea of a personal use of 10 sheets of paper was okay. What the problem is here, though, is the fact that it was a customer list. So what Katie did, or what Tori did in this situation, was took email addresses and shared them with her sister without the permission of the company or the individual customers who were now about to get spammed by Tori's sister. And of course, that spamming could reflect very poorly on the company. Like, where did you get my email address? Sorts of questions that could then undermine everyone's confidence in what's happening to my personal data and how did I get this email? So I think, Tori's mistake here, in my mind at least, was not the 10 sheets of paper on the office copy machine that she printed out and sent to her sister. The problem was the lack of thought and respect for individuals' data, even an email list. I mean, it all feels like today, like we get so many emails from so many sources, we're constantly spammed by it. It's like, sometimes I just want to throw up my hand and just give up. It's like, the world's got my email. There's no privacy there at all. Nonetheless, you have to respect the privacy of someone's email.
Here's the next question. From a viewer, how do you enforce a culture of integrity in a nonprofit where there are no shareholders or stakeholders per se, but that depends on federal funding more than charitable donations?
Yeah, well, I think the issue is still the same. Who are your stakeholders might be a little different, but instead of investors, your stakeholders may be your funders. So the government may well be a stakeholder. You may have private donors who are giving you money. What do they expect? Are there, I'll use the word strings, but what are their expectations about how the money is going to be spent and what the results are going to be? How do you treat them? And what do they need in order to feel as though their money is being well spent? So recognizing that they are stakeholders who you do need to pay attention to and make sure they're happy, I think is important. So I think the answer is, for a nonprofit, the stakeholders actually might be different. Instead of customers, you may have people who are depending on you to provide services. So those may become your stakeholders. Instead of investors, it may be private and public donors. You still will have employees who will be stakeholders no matter what, because any kind of an organization needs to be respectful of their employees and treat them well. And again, maybe the broader communities. might still be a stakeholder as well. If depending on the type of nonprofit, you may feel an obligation to serve a broader community than just those people who are directly receiving your services. So I think it's a matter of sitting and thinking for a nonprofit, what's your North Star? What's your purpose? Why does your nonprofit exist? Who are your stakeholders? And what metrics are you going to use to measure their health? And then use those metrics to judge the success of what you're operating.
Here's a question. I don't know the facts of this, but I'm sure you do, and you can comment on it. It says Airbnb stopped listing facilities in the disputed territories if they were listed by Jews, but not if they were listed by Arabs. How did this religious ethnic discrimination get past Airbnb's integrity screen? Fortunately, Airbnb reversed their position, but how could this discriminatory policy get established?
I think Airbnb ultimately got it right, as the user said, and these issues aren't always easy. There are a lot of conflicting discussions going on inside of a company. And if you don't get it right initially, you continue to listen with an open mind and figure out the way to change course. So without getting into the specifics of that particular policy, I'll just say that Airbnb generally, as part of their mission, stands for fighting discrimination. Airbnb's mission is to promote belonging in the world. And by belonging, that means promoting a world where people from different backgrounds and different cultures can actually get together face to face. And they can get to know each other, get to better understand each other. So, sometimes you end up with a challenge where, banning listings in a particular area may mean that you are also not able to accomplish your mission because you're restricting the flow of travel and you're preventing people from actually getting together. So this stuff can be very complicated. I respect Airbnb's mission tremendously. I think it's a powerful one because it's very human. In a world where so many successful companies involve using your computer, we're all behind this computer screen that I'm picking up right now, right? Airbnb is about a world where human beings are actually getting together and connecting on a human level. And I think Airbnb tries to make decisions that further that mission. That's its North Star. But look, as the user pointed out, that can be very complicated when you're operating in areas of the world where there is discrimination.
Here's a question. In the response to the coronavirus pandemic, you actually decided to delay the publication of your book, I think, and add a new chapter. So you updated the book with a chapter about leading with integrity during a crisis. Can you give an example of a company or an organization, a person who didn't get it right during the crisis, and then contrast that with an organization that did?
Sure. Look, the pandemic really changed everyththing. I had just turned the book in, an exhausting 18-month effort. You turn it in and the publishers read it and they're happy and everything's rolling. And then suddenly the entire world changes. And we had a good talk together with the publisher, and they thought, Rob, you got some really interesting ideas about doing business with integrity during a time of crisis. Why don't you get back to work and write another chapter? So I've got a terrific co-author, Joan Hamilton, and Joan and I got together and put together another chapter. And so they got a chance to update the book, which was great. I'll call out a couple of companies. I'll call out Adidas. Adidas was one of the last companies to shut down their stores when retail stores all around it were closing due to the pandemic. And it really took an outcry, I think, from a number of employees who didn't feel safe to get the stores closed. But worse than that, the German government made monies available to help small businesses get through paying rent during a crisis. In fact, I think it was permission to not pay rent for an extended period of time to help them get through. Now, the bill was designed to help small businesses, but Adidas immediately announced that they were taking advantage of this and they would not be paying rent at any of their stores. And there was a huge outcry. and Adidas, it was interesting, in both cases, Adidas immediately had to reverse course. But I think if they had been thinking about employees or thinking about the broader community, and instead of just thinking about hitting a money number, they would have made the mistake in the first place. So I think they learned some lessons in dealing with the virus. I think they were immediately focused on a short-term number instead of thinking more broadly about stakeholders. More generally, I think Microsoft has done a very good job. And I haven't always felt that way about Microsoft, but I think Microsoft has broadly committed to acting with integrity in the way that they deal with employees. They came up with some very creative employee programs that a number of other companies then were forced to follow just to match. And they've done a number of things, I think, with climate change and waste and water, and set very aggressive targets and made progress toward those targets that I really respect. And I think that take Patagonia and REI have done some wonderful things as well, consistent with their mission of the environment, protecting the environment and respect for the wilderness. So there are a couple of examples, I think, of companies that have done some good things and companies that have had some missteps.
Great. As you think back on your experience, we started out by talking about this as a memoir of your life experience. Can you share with us what is one of the hardest ethical dilemmas that you faced? How did you respond at the time? And now, knowing what you know now, would you have responded differently?
I'm lucky. I had, when I was young, my mom really impressed on me this idea of doing the right thing. So, I tell a story in the book of my mom walking with me back into a grocery store with money in her hand to return money because she had gotten too much change. And, I know a lot of people in those similar circumstances would have been able to come up with a lot of rationalizations about why they weren't going to go back into the store, right? Oh, the store makes a lot of money anyway. It's not that much. Or their prices are really high, they ripped me off, or I'm sure they've shortchanged me in the past. There are a lot of reasons and a lot of rationalizations that you can often come up with. But my mom always really, I think, taught me to focus on trying to do the right thing. And that, I think, has led me, I've certainly made mistakes in my life, but I think I've at least tried to recognize that there was at least an effort at the time to try to do the right thing, even if I may have made that mistake. I think one example of a difficult issue was dealing with discrimination at Airbnb. I remember when there was the movement around users who were being turned down as guests because of the color of their skin, and there were a Twitter handle, I think Airbnb while black, stories were popping up. And it was a really challenging time for the company. And I think the company was very surprised by it. But I remember going in to talk to Brian Chesky. This was, early in my days as general counsel. And I had done all of my research on the law, right? Now, what's the law of a platform? What's the liability of a platform if some of its users behave badly like this? And I started to go through the law with Brian, and Brian held up his hand and said, "Stop. I don't care." I said, "What do you mean you don't care?" And he said, "Rob, if people are being discriminated against on our platform, we are failing as a company. Our mission is to promote belonging." And he said, "I don't care what the law says, and I don't care if it costs us money. We're fixing it." And that was a real moment for me, where I got out of my legal head and realized that a lot of times just doing the right thing is a very powerful thing, and actually ends up putting you in a better legal position, and probably even in a better brand and financial position in the long run. And I'm proud of what the company did in response. And I think that doing that was a powerful moment for the company. And I think enabled us to avoid what could have been a much worse legal situation, but also something that would have been an embarrassing stain on the brand in the long run.
Rob, thank you so much for this opportunity to have you here with us on CHM Live. We like to close every program by asking if you have one word of advice that you would give to a young person starting out in their career. what would that word be?
All right.
Can you show us what you've chosen, reveal it, and then tell us a specific story about why you chose it?
Well, the word I've chosen is curiosity. And, I thought a lot about this. Often in my life, I've been presented with opportunities to do new things. And new things can be scary. New things can be, because it's not what you do, right? I think, Meg Whitman came to me after I had been at eBay for a few years, and she said, I'd like for you to start our trust and safety department. I want you to stop fraud on eBay. And I remember my initial reaction is, you gotta be crazy, I'm a lawyer. And she said, yeah, but she said, I've got confidence in you and I think you'll figure it out. And I went away and reflected on it. And I ended up saying yes, and it was one of the smartest things I've ever done. I think it's so important that we embrace curiosity. And to be a lifelong learner. And I think I thought, well, you go to college, you go to law school, thank goodness the learning's done, right? And I think it's only beginning. I think if you embrace the world with a spirit of curiosity, take on new things, be open to things that might be different than what you were expecting, and don't put limits on yourself. I think that can lead to a much richer life. And I think it's a healthy way to grow a career as well. So I would advise and urge everyone when they are going through life and going through their career, embrace curiosity.
Thank you. We'll remember curiosity and certainly integrity. On behalf of all of the viewers and participants today, and as well as the museum, I want to say thank you, Rob Chesnut, for joining us today and sharing your insights and stories. Thanks again.
I appreciate it. Thank you, Mark.